Good morning, everyone. I'm Reverend Dory, and this is the course on Corinth and the early Christians. So today we're going to look at the question of who was attracted to Paul's message and attracted to the Christian church. Now, one of the things I read is that the reason why Paul's train was able to go so fast and so successfully was because the Jews had already laid the tracks. At this time, there are more Jews living outside of Israel than there are inside Israel. Of course, that's true today as well. And in what is called the diaspora. So all around the Roman Empire, there are lots of Jews living. And they are not exactly what we would call an evangelical group at that time, but they are very friendly towards pagans. You may remember that in Jesus' time, people who lived in Israel did not associate with pagans. Well, that is not true in the diaspora. The Jews found that if they began to associate with pagans, that the pagans learned more about them, and in fact, they were safer. So they began to invite pagans, to come to the synagogue to experience a synagogue with them. Now, there was no sacrifice at the synagogue. It was all about studying the scriptures and talking about the scriptures and praying together. And there turned out to be a lot of pagans who were frustrated with the religion of the Greeks and the Romans, which were really pretty immoral. And also, they were frustrated with the philosophers that were pretty much all in the head and not in the heart. And so a lot of pagans began to be attracted to the Jewish God, the monotheism, and to the Jewish way of approaching life, and to Jewish prayers. And they become what's called the God-fearers. Sometimes they're called the God worshippers, but essentially you had a lot of pagans who were coming to synagogue, and they're called the God-fearers. So you have the Jews who are at the synagogue, you have the God-fearers who are also at the synagogue, and then you have the pagans who are outside the culture, outside in the culture. Now, the best way I can understand the God-fearers is to think about yoga. Yoga and Eastern meditation are very much a part of Hinduism. But many Americans become very involved with yoga and Eastern meditation and never imagine that they would become Hindus. Does that make sense? Well, the same thing with the God-fearers. They're very much drawn to the God that is represented in the scriptures that are there, but they don't intend to become Jews. And when Paul comes through, and he first goes to the synagogue, the people that he's after are these folks. Because you can become a Christian without becoming a Jew. You can be baptized and become a Christian without being circumcised, without following all the Jewish dietary rules, without all the restrictions that Jews lived under. And so this is who he is after, and who largely starts the Christian faith. Now, we know that a lot of synagogues had maybe as much as 50% of the people going there were not Jews, because there are these columns that say, this synagogue was built by, and then it lists all the donors, right? And more than half of them have non-Jewish names. So you're not only taking away half of the population who comes to the synagogue, but you're taking away the largest numbers of givers, because as a rule, pagans were more wealthy than Jews. So this is how his churches grew so fast, so quickly. But it's, how he was able to be such a successful evangelist. But it's not the only people who were attracted to Christianity. Now, I wanted to put Lydia's name up here. Lydia was the first, she's in Philippi, and she's the first recorded Christian in the European continent. But she embodies a lot of the things of people who are attracted to Paul's message. First of all, she's a God-fearer. She's gathered with a group of women to essentially hold synagogue, only they don't have a building. They're out on the river, by the river. Secondly, she's a woman. Now, a lot of the early churches were held in houses. Okay, in fact, it says that Lydia invited Paul to come and stay at her house. Well, that doesn't just mean that he's sleeping there. It means that he's operating his church out of her house. Now, in Roman culture, men had priority and in public spaces, and women had priority in domestic spaces, in the home. So the person who was most in charge in the home were the women and the people, but once you left the home, then it was men who were in charge. And this is how we ended up with this situation where we had in the early church, many churches were led by women. And Paul speaks of all these different women who are a part of his mission and a part of the church. But when the church grows to the point that they outgrow the houses and begin to build church buildings, then you have moved into public spaces. And at that point, you begin having people say, we can't have women in leadership. This is totally wrong. They can't be a part of this. And so you begin having these people say, women should be silent in the church. And I think I can't speak about Corinth without speaking about this particular, in 1 Corinthians, it's 14:33b through 35. And it says, as in all the churches of God's people, the women should keep quiet in the meetings. They are not allowed to speak, as the Jewish law says they must not be in charge. They want to find out about something, they should ask their husbands at home. It is a disgraceful thing for a woman to speak in a church meeting. Now, virtually all the scholars believe that that is not Paul. That was added at the same time that the book of Timothy was written in Paul's name. In early manuscripts, that particular phrase is in several different places. And if you read the script before and then the script after, it's all really one argument. So this has been something that was put in later on after Paul's death. But a lot of people have pointed to it and said, see, Paul said that. And that is really what scholars say Paul never said. So the second thing that you have is people who have ambiguous status. Now, Lydia is a good example of that. She owns her own business. She also is the head of the household. There's apparently no man in her life that's ever referred to. So she's wealthy. All those things are not what women normally have. Women are normally subservient to men in that culture. So you have someone who has ambiguous status. And by the way, Luke says, or the writer of Acts, says that she's a maker of purple cloth, which is the most expensive cloth. And that's probably not right. She's probably the maker of bright red cloth, because bright red was made from the roots of a plant that grows in that area, where purple is made from a little sea creature that's not around there. So anyway, she's a wealthy businesswoman, but her status as a result is really ambiguous. And so other people with ambiguous status, such as slaves who are educated, okay, or women who are wealthy, as I said, or men who belong to another, men who are men who are poor, actually, would also be another group that would be attracted to Christianity. So you have, but in Corinth itself, you have another couple of groups who are very much attracted to Paul's message. And one of them is that there are people who are without established community. You remember that Paul made no headway in Athens. And I think of Athens as a place that has pretty much settled community. You know, people have their families and their friends and their activities, and they're not in the market for something new. But this is not true in Corinth, because Corinth is a brand new city. It's also a city where there's lots of people flowing in and out, because it's a seaport, it's also a travel place. So it's really a place where there's lots of people who don't have community. I think one of the best examples of evangelizing people without community is Wesley. Because Wesley went to the mines and to the factories, which were filled with people who had come in from the country to find work. They left their community and their family behind, and he evangelizes them and gives them community. Sets them up in little groups who become their new family. So that's exactly what Paul does too. And then you find that there's lots of immigrants. This is a place where they say that if you sit there long enough, you'll see everyone in the world. They say that about, I think, Marseille or some other places too. But essentially, there's lots of people coming and going all the time. There's lots of immigrants. There are people who come in the seaport and decide to settle there. They're just a lot of new folks. And those folks are looking for community and looking for a group to attach themselves to. The Romans were very much even now, the Italians are very social, right? And the Romans were really like that. They love joining groups. And there's all kinds of groups. There's religious groups, and there's groups that have sports, and there's groups that have around different kinds of careers and so on. They're just all different kinds of groups. The Romans are very much a part of that. And this, you remember, Corinth is a Roman city and not a Greek city. So this is another group that you could join. It was a group, though, that made it hard for you to belong to a lot of the other groups that you might want to belong to because of the restrictions about eating meat that was sacrificed to idols or sacrificing to other gods and so on. So another group that you have is you have a lot of slaves who are attracted to Christianity. In the Christian community, they are free like everyone else. They're not, and it's one of the things that causes problems in the Corinthian church, is that Paul says everyone is on the same level, but they are still trying to be a part of the Roman society. And so they're still trying to maintain hierarchy, and that includes people who are free and people who are slave, trying to separate themselves from each other. The slaves want to be a part on an equal basis, and other people want to keep them as slaves. So that's one of the big issues that Paul always has to deal with in Corinth. And the final thing that I put this up today, people who are attracted, who are anti-empire, who are anti the Roman system, who remember the Romans had what they called the Pax Romana, which is peace through violence, peace through making sure that anybody who causes any problem in the society gets crucified. And the other thing, but you have Jesus, who they call the Pax Christi, peace through love, peace through inclusion, peace through everyone being a part. So I wanted to say just a minute also about the Roman society. Roman society is what's called a patron-client society. We're used to an upper, middle, and lower class society like that. Well, the Roman society is a patron-client society. The top patron, of course, is the emperor. Below him would be all the generals. Below them would be all of the soldiers. Below them would be all of the people who work for the soldiers, and so on down to the slaves and the poor on the bottom. And Paul is very insistent that he got his own money while he was at Corinth, that he worked for his own living, meaning that he refused to have a patron. He takes money from other churches, but he does not take money from Corinth, because the way it's offered is I'll be your patron, and if you have a patron, then you have to be the client. And Paul is very much outspoken against this kind of social structure, that you have people who are on the top, who are then people under them, who are under them, who are under them. He says, no, all are equal in Christ. Women and men, Greeks and Jews, slave and free, for all are one in Christ Jesus. And those are the big issues in the Corinthian church, is issues of hierarchy. And it most often shows when they come together for communion. Communion is not just like we take it as a ceremony. It was a whole meal. And unfortunately, they didn't always do it as a pitch-in. This table over here would bring their food, and they would eat it. And this table over here would bring their food, and you would eat it. And this table, being a group of slaves, they don't have any food, so they don't have anything to eat. And he's saying, this is completely wrong. You have to share everything that you have. So that if you want to eat fancy food and drink fancy drink, do it at home. Don't do it when you come together to share the body and blood of Christ. So that is our lecture for today.